Mark Rogers TV on a crazy weekend of college football. Week 13, I'll run down my thoughts going coast to coast and around the conferences, and certainly as it pertains to the BCS National Championship picture. And then I want to hear from you. Please follow me on Twitter at MarkRogersTV and also subscribe to our YouTube channel right here if you love college football and like to discuss and debate it. I'm going to start out west, even though this really didn't have a direct effect on the BCS National Championship matchup. Some comments were made by the Oregon Ducks, most specifically Anthony Thomas and also Josh Huff this week, pretty much dissing the Rose Bowl, saying, hey, whatever, we really don't have any interest in playing in the Rose Bowl. We're all about playing in the National Championship. Well, if they didn't prove in mostly 3 quarters against Stanford that they're not deserving of playing for a national championship, they certainly made their point against Arizona. And no, Oregon, you're not even worthy of playing in the Rose Bowl representing the Pac-12. That honor will go to either Stanford or Arizona State. So Oregon, you're dynamic. We love the uniforms, we love the glitz, we love the glamour, we love the high scores, and it works most of the time, but against quality opponents, it doesn't work. And I mean high quality opponents, and on this day, didn't even work against a marginal Arizona team that was embarrassed the week before by Washington State of all teams. So Oregon, welcome to the Holiday Bowl. We hope you enjoy playing in the Holiday Bowl in San Diego. San Diego, lovely, certainly in late December. That moves us on to the 2 participants for the Pac-12 championship. So the Pac-12 has likened itself to the SEC and put itself on that tier the entire season. So we can go with the argument that it's clearly not the SEC, or we can go with the argument that it's so strong that teams are beating up on one another. Last week we saw it with Stanford losing to USC. Here we see Arizona State emerging to win the Pac-12 South Championship. We see where Arizona knocks off an Oregon. So there are no true elite teams in the Pac-12, but we will have 2 very good football teams going at it next week, actually in 2 weeks when the regular season's over. And Stanford has taken on Notre Dame out of conference because they've locked up the Pac-12 North. And for Arizona State, rival Arizona could kind of taint the season just a little bit, but they will still compete for the Pac-12 championship. So it's Stanford and Arizona State in 2 weeks. We saw the Sun Devils look dominant for the first half in leading UCLA 35-13, and Arizona State also looked dominant the last 2 drives of defense in this game. Brett Hundley had completed 14 consecutive passes in bringing the Bruins back. He was on the brink of taking the lead with the ball inside the 5-yard, but a big sack by the Sun Devil defense, and then the missed field goal, and that forced UCLA to have to score a touchdown the final drive. They were still moving the football, converted a 4th down inside of a minute, but some penalties and some sacks in the Arizona State defense. The defense that has built this program under Todd Graham took charge again on the last 2 series to hold UCLA out of the end zone, and Arizona State marches on to the Pac-12 championship game 38-33. Jim Mora's program is on the rise, but not quite there, ready to take on the Oregons and also the Stanfords, and on this day, Arizona State. So there's your Pac-12 championship games. Should be a good one in a couple of weeks with the Cardinal taking on the Sun Devils, and Arizona State's playing for home field advantage next week against arch rival Arizona. The game of the week, at least the matchup of the week concerning the BCS standings, had to be at the Big 12 with Oklahoma State hosting Baylor. We sized up this matchup as one in which Baylor had its toughest challenge of the season. We looked at the Cowboys as being the best team that Baylor has faced, clearly 10th ranked in the country, coming in at 9-1, with, in addition to the offense this season, averaging 40 points a game, a defense that was 17th in the country in scoring defense and facing a lot of good offenses along the way. But the Baylor offense-defense combination just, we thought, was going to be too much for this Oklahoma State team in a very competitive game. But this was not a competitive game because Oklahoma State put it all together, offense and defense. And again, going into this matchup with Clint Shelf completing just 53% of his passes, and the 2 running backs Desmond and Smith averaging just about 4 yards per carry against marginal defenses. We certainly thought that Baylor was going to be superior in this game, take care of business, and challenge Ohio State for the third spot. But this was not a game as Oklahoma State won it in impressive fashion, 49-17. So the Baylor offense, which was averaging over 61 points per game and threatening an all-time NCAA record, scored just 17 on this night and really just scored 3 points when it really mattered before this game got away from them, and way under the average of 685 yards per game. So Oklahoma State, we forget about conference championships sometimes in this BCS era, but they're the only tangible championships out there because we select the participants in the national championship game. The conference championship still near and dear to my heart, and this one was a Big 12 championship type atmosphere and type game for Oklahoma State, which can wrap it up with another win. So they move on to 10-1, and Baylor, unless they get an upset from Oklahoma State versus Oklahoma next week, will not win even the Big 12 championship, let alone get to that BCS national championship game. Which brings us to the effort of Missouri going to Ole Miss, where the Rebels have been extremely tough. Remember the win against LSU. They took Texas A&M to the wire, to the last play of the game. Really, the only team that Ole Miss has not competed against this year is Alabama, 25-0. They've taken out Texas. They've taken out some really good football teams. They played Auburn to a one-possession game. But Missouri was in control of this game. I'm not going to say that they dominated the game, but James Franklin came back, and he made some plays with his feet and with his arm. The big wide receivers that they have, the talent at wide receiver for Missouri and the depth at wide receiver for Missouri was evident in this football game. And the front four on defense, again, was dominant for the Tigers in winning a huge game on the road against Ole Miss, 24-10. So it's all in Missouri's grasp to go to an SEC championship game in Atlanta just 1 year after an awful 2-6 start in its SEC history. Missouri will take on Texas A&M with a chance to go to Atlanta to face the Alabama-Auburn winner. Auburn off this week, and Alabama basically off this week and taking on Chattanooga. The other big story in the SEC didn't have anything to do with championships, but it was an entertaining performance by LSU. I expected this to be the game of the week, just in regards to watching football, watching power football versus finesse speed, throw it all over the field football with Texas A&M going to LSU, and Johnny Manziel never losing a football game on the road in 23 total games at Texas A&M coming in, but LSU was dominant in this game. I certainly didn't like the weather forecast in meshing with my prediction that Texas A&M would cover the plus 4.5 spread, because once I heard there was going to be a slick field, muddy playing conditions, and a consistent rain throughout the game, that certainly threw this game and tilted the field in LSU's favor, with Jeremy Hill gaining 76 yards. And Kenny Hilliard had a huge game with 149, or Terrence McGee actually had the big game with close to 150 yards, and Kenny Hilliard and Alfred Blue chipped in as well, as LSU completely dominated the football game against Johnny Manziel. And just when most of us thought that this LSU defense, which really pinned the one bad game on Johnny Manziel's Heisman season last year with 3 picks, 3 interceptions, and only 27 yards rushing, that defense was long gone and off to the NFL with Eric Reed and Kevin Minter and Markevius Mingo and company. Well, their replacements stood up to the challenge and handed, again, in 2013, Johnny Manziel's worst performance. 16 of 41, 224 yards, 2 picks, and he just couldn't get anything done. 10 points on the board out of Texas A&M, an offense that scores 49 per game. So this probably shakes up the Heisman race and makes a serious dilemma for Heisman voters who were looking, most of them, I believe, as Johnny Manziel being a default to Jameis Winston and the issues off the field with the Florida State quarterback, that Johnny Manziel and his better numbers in 2013 being a great choice, as he would lead Texas A&M to a BCS bowl game. But now at 8-3, that's out of the question. And A.J. McCarron is certainly picking up points as more and more information and news comes out about Jameis Winston's situation in Tallahassee. So next week, of course, it sets up Alabama versus Auburn for the SEC championship berth coming out of the West. Missouri is going to have to defeat Texas A&M to hold off South Carolina out of the East. Ohio State, say what you will about their schedule, which has certainly included Illinois and Indiana in recent weeks, but we see it all over college football, whether you're talking about Stanford losing to Utah, Arizona upsetting Oregon today, Baylor losing to a very good Oklahoma State team, so we won't use that as an example. But look around college football over the past 2 years, and the supposed elite teams, the teams that we thought were ready to contend for a national championship, knocked off by marginal teams. Ohio State's avoided that, and believe me, again, as I stated earlier this week in a video post, Michigan State and Wisconsin are much better than most people out there in the national media think they are. They are legitimate top 10, top 12 teams. Michigan State with another impressive win this week against Northwestern, 30-6, and forget that Northwestern's 0-7 in the Big Ten. This is the best 0-7 team by far at any conference that I can remember since watching college football. They have lost every game up until this week down to the wire against some quality teams. When you're talking about losing to Iowa in overtime, Ohio State taking them down to the last drive of the game, and on and on. Of course, the crazy Hail Mary against Nebraska. So Northwestern's not a good football team, but a pretty decent football team at 4-7. But Michigan State was dominant. Ohio State dominant again. And credit the Buckeyes for taking care of business. Look at Florida State's schedule. The one impressive win is Clemson. Miami is no longer an impressive football team at 8-3 that lost 3 consecutive games and lost to Duke by 18 points. And Virginia Tech's not a great victory either. Saying that Virginia Tech also beat Miami. Florida State and Virginia Tech did not play this year. Just saying that there's not enough good schedules out there. So to knock Ohio State's schedule, you need to look at some other teams around the country and top teams, namely in Tallahassee. So those are basically our thoughts of the BCS landscape right now. Of course, Alabama and Florida State hold serve. Ohio State certainly not challenged at this point because of the loss by Baylor. And this now opens it up for Auburn and Missouri to a certain extent because they would just need a loss. And when I say just a loss, we know that Florida State's schedule is complete nothing. Looking at Florida and the ACC championship game. But one loss out of either Alabama or Florida State, or basically Florida State, would pave the way for Auburn or Missouri to win on out, including a win over Alabama for either one of those teams, either next week or in the SEC championship game, for a Cinderella out of the SEC to get to the BCS National Championship game. Got a lot of thoughts on college football. We didn't even touch on Florida, which I think is amazing that Georgia Southern not only won the game, but did not complete a pass in going over 3, but ran it down the Gators' throats. And I don't care how many injuries they have. This team recruits 5- and 4-star athletes. So Will Muschamp thought he was feeling the hot seat, but he has not felt anything yet. The wrath is going to be coming down in Gainesville. And Will Muschamp may have sealed his fate with an inexplicable loss against Georgia Southern. So again, Mark Rogers TV on college football, the landscape here in Week 13, looking at the BCS and the National Championship game, and also the Conference Championship games coming up in a couple weeks. And it's interesting to note, maybe I lucked out here, but go back and look at my season preview, where I picked Michigan State and Ohio State to meet in the Big Ten Championship game. Also picked Alabama, South Carolina to meet in the SEC Championship game, which of course won't happen unless Missouri loses. And also the Pac-12 Championship game. Got that right with Stanford and Arizona State. Now this only works if you talk back to me. Need to hear from you on college football. Your thoughts on the BCS race and the conference championship races as well. Right here on Mark Rogers TV.